By no surprise, Kansas State is once again ahead of the curve.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast for the Kansas State Wildcats. And thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. If you are listening, if you're new to the show, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. And go ahead and click that like and subscribe button while you're there. We are building up to 600 subscribers. We are cooking in the month of February. We got plenty to talk about today. We're going to get into some men's basketball at the end of the show as they travel to Arizona State. We have a familiar face returning back to the college football program. But first, we definitely have to get into this new, well, I wouldn't say new, but this interesting update about the tampering happening across the league. But first, let's get into it. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way than to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bet. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com today to get started. As I mentioned, the tampering issue doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon in college football. And I started off this show saying that Kansas State is ahead of the curve. And by no surprise, they have already kind of taken a step forward with this. Now, I'm not saying that they're immune to tampering or possibly that they're tampering themselves. And I'll get into that. And I'm not pointing any fingers. So let's make sure I'm pointing and saying that. But I think you'll understand what I'm getting at after this conversation. This all leads to what Nebraska head coach Matt Rhule came out earlier this week, over the weekend, and stated that he is deciding to most likely forego the spring game because he does not want to show some of the talent that he's brought in to his new football program. Now, Nebraska has stepped up over the last couple seasons with Rhule there. He is bringing that program back to its hopeful belongings to where as a powerhouse ? But getting it back to at least to be able to contend in the Big Ten. We know the past Big Eight kind of rivalries and feelings with Nebraska, but I think we can leave them for a different conversation. But that is just one piece of the puzzle. There's also other things of reports coming out that Ohio State wide receivers, national champion Ohio State wide receivers, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, were also being offered millions of dollars, some up to $4.5 million just to enter the transfer portal. Now, obviously, it would be in hopes to grab to whatever team, but that seems like obvious tampering to me. You haven't entered the portal and you're getting this process of saying, hey, you should enter. Here's all this money to entice you to go and do that. So I want to kind of just get to the bottom of what this tampering is. Can it be changed? And does a team like Kansas State have to worry about this moving forward? The reason I said they're already ahead of the curve goes back to the Matt Rhule conversation about them canceling the spring game. I don't think that's a bad idea if I'm Nebraska. Now, if I'm a fan of the Cornhuskers, I'm a little upset because it's a national broadcasted game. It's usually on the Big Ten network every year. They do it for the fans. The spring game is for the fans, most part. So in that aspect, I'm a little upset because that's one more way to be able to support your team. It usually involves a fan appreciation of some sort as well, and all that good stuff, right? But Kansas State hasn't had a spring game for the last 4 years. Now, one of them was because of COVID, but since that, Coach Kleiman has decided to forego the spring game. Now, his conversation, his view, his argument, or reasoning, if you will, of why he said that he did not want to do it is he didn't have a good feel for his roster at this time. Now, there's only a certain amount of time and hours, and you have to have mandatory days off in the spring for your football roster. So it's not the same type of production, not the same type of workload, or really the same type of routine that you can get in than you are in the fall camp and obviously into the regular season and moving forward, so forth. So Chris Kleiman and his coaching staff have decided to move away from the spring game to be able to focus more on other aspects. And it's worked out for them. They're one of only the few teams in all of college football that have at least 8 wins over the past few seasons, and they continue to be a top premier program in all of college football. They won the Big 12 Conference Championship in 2022. They had a 7-1 start this past season. They won the Rape Bowl this past year, and they don't seem to be in the news when it comes to players being tampered with. Now, I think you go back and have the conversation about Will Howard. That might be a conversation. Who knows? But I think when it's all said and done, Will Howard, national champion Will Howard now, former Kansas State Wildcat, that turnaround, that what I'm looking for here, that movement from him seemed to be a win for both sides, Kansas State and Will Howard, when it's all said and done. But the reason I also said at the beginning of the show that tampering is probably not going away, and it's hard to be able to determine that who is tampering, because there is no overall body to regulate this. Now, you would initially think the NCAA would be able to do something like that, would be able to oversee tampering or making sure, but at a conference level, it doesn't seem like it's able to move when it comes to the transfer portal. One way that you could think about trying to regulate it, my first thing that came to mind, would be to hire an overall commissioner for college football. You don't have that right now. You have commissioners for conferences. For example, in the Big 12, Brett Yormark is doing a fantastic job in the Big 12 conference. But what about an overall college football commissioner? That would kind of close the umbrella, if you will, for college football and try and help and solidify maybe some of these tampering issues inside the game. Now, college football isn't the only sport that is dealing with this tampering. College basketball deals with it quite a lot as well. And I'm sure every other sport is also dealing with it in college athletics. We just hear mostly about it when it comes to football and basketball. I don't think you could make an umbrella for all of college athletics and think you're going to be able to get something done, because we've seen how that doesn't work with the NCAA, where they really don't have any jurisdiction. There's a whole conversation going on right now about a player leaving Wisconsin going to Miami who wasn't allowed to enter the transfer portal, but is unenrolling in the school, enrolling in the other, and looks like he's going to be able to play. NCAA really just put their hands up saying they had no idea. I guess they can just do what they want. And that's really where the NCAA is sitting. They don't really have any power. We're starting to figure that out. Here's the problem, though. If a college football commissioner was created, one, how does it get created? Because if we don't have an overall body to have jurisdiction, who makes that hire? You can't just create a job listing out of the blue and just hope someone is hired. And who makes that hire? Where's the interview process? Who gets it? How does that person get appointed, right? What would the contract be? Who would pay them? There's a lot of issues on that front. But the idea sounds really good. Now, initially I said we don't really know who is tampering, and that's true. We don't. And for the record, if people are tampering and we know it's happening, does it matter right now? It's unfortunate. And for the record, I hate it. But I also hope that if we are seeing tampering, that my school's doing it too. And the reason I say that, and it's not because I want to be a dirty player or a dirty fan by any means, but we are in a period right now of college football where parity is becoming more and more intense. We saw it with the Big 12 conference last year. We saw it with the college football playoffs this past year. There was this whole conversation of, was there truly a GOAT team, right? Our national champion lost to a Michigan team that hardly made a bowl game. So if you are going to find any way to take an advantage, if another school is willing to take that step, whether it's seen or frowned upon, then why don't you do it as well? I mean, at this point, if the worst case you're going to get is a hand slap, but it helps you become a more better team on the field, it helps you become a competitive team that could possibly bring you into the college football playoffs. And may I mention that just making the college football playoffs in 2025 was a $4 million bonus for your conference. I mean, that's a lot of money to keep thinking for tampering if there is no issue against it. There is one issue about saying that you are going to be publicly humiliated. Okay, we saw the SEC try to do that with certain aspects of against their coaching staffs in the past. But even if you tell on a coach, because we've seen this over the past, I've seen it with other coaches, other programs, calling out other schools saying they are tampering and nothing happens because there's no jurisdiction. So if you're a Kansas State fan or you're a Kansas State player, and right now we don't have this problem, but we're going to be entering a brand new season where spring ball, there's a lot of momentum, a huge national signing class, a huge transfer portal for this school. Avery Johnson entering his second full season as the starting quarterback of the squad. We already saw what happens when you get quarterbacks from Kansas State going to a different school. What happens? You have a star, shifty running back who we were praying didn't leave the portal. Thankfully, he didn't. You have a star, fast, outside wide receiver one that has a big threat capability on every down that we hoped that didn't leave the portal, and he didn't. Why would you want to have a spring game? Why would you want to showcase that even more? Yes, people know who Jace Brown are. People know who Dylan Edwards are and Avery Johnson, all that good stuff. But maybe not many know who a Zayshawn Rich is or some of those other young cornerbacks that you want to try and keep them and with their new production they've learned this offseason in-house, at least until you get to Dublin. You can't really hold back what happens in the main transfer portal in the offseason, but you can kind of have a little bit more control, especially with this new 105 roster size in this spring portal window. I don't think it's a bad idea. If I'm Matt Rhule, I think it's a great idea for not having a spring game because of this possibility. I think it's a great call. And I'm glad that Chris Kleiman, and I hope that he decides to not have another spring game this year. I would love to have more of a fan appreciation kind of style thing, just to continue to support the football team. But I want to keep these players in house because we got lucky this year with keeping all these players, and the Avery Johnson effect is in full swing going into this season. But what happens next year when you're entering the third season of Avery Johnson, especially after the team is going to compete most likely for a Big 12 conference championship and most likely be in the college football playoffs? What happens to a Dylan Edwards? There's a lot of things over those young cornerbacks entering, or maybe possibly of a Lincoln Cure, the greatest recruit of all time in Kansas State program history. What if he has a great freshman season? Poaching is going to be a thing. Kansas State has to do everything they possibly can to make sure that doesn't happen moving down the line. I don't blame them if they continue to not have a spring game moving forward. But we're still going to have you covered here talking about plenty of college football on this channel, whether they have a spring game or not. I'm tracking that they won't 5 years in a row, and I think that'd be a great thing. The tampering aspect is such an interesting conversation. It's such an interesting conversation, and it doesn't affect just the top teams in all of college football. It affects every team, all 134. You could even add the FBS into this conversation because it's absolutely a huge problem that no one has a solution to right now. No one has a solution to right now. When we get back, I got some interesting and fun news to talk about of the Kansas State football team. A player that we all know and love will be returning back for his 7th season with the program. We'll do that right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel's Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easier to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature also keeps you involved no matter what happens on the field. And just knowing that you can bet a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for just watching the Super Bowl and betting on the Super Bowl, well, that's icing on the cake. Download the app today or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5. And if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. $200. Can you believe it? That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Hey, for your second listen, checked out Locked On Big 12. We know all about Locked On Big 12's or Big 12's commissioner, Brett Yormark. Speaking of commissioners, as I mentioned earlier, he's one of the best in the biz. If there was going to be a college football commissioner, he would have my vote as the overall one personally. But Drake Toll takes you through all the news in the conference every single day of the week. Check him out on Locked On Big 12 for your second listen of the day. If you're just listening or just tuning in for Locked On Kansas State for your first time, do me a favor, click that like, subscribe button, all that good stuff, and join the conversation. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts about the college football commissioner. Do you think that's a good idea? And who would be your pick? Who would be your pick to be college football commissioner? It'd be an interesting conversation here. For the 7th season in the program, Taylor Potier will be back. The right guard for Kansas State is returning. It looks like his waiver has been approved. He headed the social media and said, let's do this again. And it is very exciting to have him back. After having a fantastic transfer portal, adding in some good interior linemen with a USC guard, Amos Talele, and having some offensive tackles in Brandon Snee and the recently picked up of George Fitzpatrick from Ohio State, adding in Taylor Potier to continue to play right guard is a huge thing. You know, we thought we were going to be entering new territory for Kansas State this year with Chris Kleiman entering his 7th season. We thought that even with the COVID year, we were going to finally say goodbye to all of the players who were with Coach Kleiman at the beginning of his tenure at Kansas State. We will have at least one more year because Taylor Potier has been here since Coach Kleiman has been there with the staff. There was a conversation, there was a report that came out around senior day for Potier talking about how his whole journey to Kansas State. He obviously has dealt with injuries earlier in his tenure. That's why he's granted an extra year of eligibility on a waiver. And he has been thick and through with Connor Riley and Coach Kleiman and the entire Kansas State staff. So it's really exciting to have him back. You know, in 2019, he was the number 12 ranked prospect in the state, only one behind Beebe, only one behind that Dallas Cowboys offensive lineman, former Kansas State Wildcat. So he's got a lot of potential, and we've known that for quite some time. And what he has done for this program has already been amazing, and it's really great to have him play one more season with Kansas State. According to PFF, he had a 69.1 grade, which was good enough for 24th overall. And I believe that's for all of guards in college football, at least in the career grades wise. That's what it says. It doesn't say the actual what it's around, but it's 24th out of 639. So whatever it is overall, I'm guessing over against all guards, or maybe it's all right guards. 639 seems a lot for just one side. So it's probably all guards. But 24th out of 639 is a really good thing, regardless of what it's compared to. He played 692 snaps on the offensive line, all at right guard, and then obviously played some on special teams with the field goals and extra points. He has a really good chance at becoming a player that plays on Sundays starting next year. I could see him having a great year, and obviously if he stays healthy, we're going to see him probably enter the NFL draft, and I can see him doing really well at the next level, to be completely honest. But what a big deal it is to have him back with all the movement that's happened with the offensive line, with the movement on transfers. You had players move to like University of Washington, and then obviously had transfers coming in, as I mentioned, with Snee and Fitzpatrick and Talele. Having just a familiar face on that offensive line with clearly a ton of experience and a ton of talent. If he would have been a 3-year starter if it wasn't for his ACL injury in 2022, but he played great in 2023 and obviously fantastic in 2024. So this will be his 3rd year to be a 3-year starter if everything goes to plan and he stays healthy. But really good to have him back. It's one extra piece to protect Avery Johnson to make that next step forward to get back in contention for the Big 12 conference and hopefully win that championship this coming season, and having that interior line solidified and help just lead this team, which could be a young position group heading into the fall, depending on what type of moves are made with the 105 because I think a couple of those players uh, are going to be offensive linemen just based on what we have right now, what I'm projecting, what is predicted. Looking at about 130 players on the roster right now. So you're going to have to cut down about 25 players, probably up to 30 players because you're probably going to have a little bit of rotation, bringing in some players in the spring portal as well. So I'm guessing that some of that turnover will still happen with the offensive line as well. So I'm guessing we're going to have a younger group of offensive linemen when it comes to the room as a whole. Having a player like Potier return will be absolutely huge. And it's exciting. It's really exciting. To me, I think this is one extra piece to help this team make that step forward for another Big 12 contention. Get them back to where they were. And I mentioned this before, and it's good enough to mention again. I feel like this team has more momentum than they've ever had dating back to their conference championship win in 2022. Momentum has never been as high since that time in the last couple seasons. Really excited heading into this offseason. Hopefully they can carry that moving the rest of the way through Dublin, in Manhattan, on the road in the Big 12, you name it, against Army, doesn't matter, non-conference, which we're all going to have covered as the schedule release actually comes out tomorrow. And we'll have that covered here on this show as well. Let's shift over to basketball as we finish up this show because the Wildcats are on a winning streak and it's exciting. Can it continue? And are we in trouble for a potential trap game? We'll talk about that to wrap up the show right here on Locked On Kansas State. And welcome back for this final segment of Locked On Kansas State. Thank you for making your first listen of the day. We will have the post game tomorrow for the men's basketball game. We will have a live post game. As soon as the game is over, win or lose, we will be live right here on Locked On Kansas State YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out. Join the conversation. Love having you involved. If you talk a comment, if you have a question, if you have your thoughts, I share them live on the air. So join me on YouTube right after the game. Speaking of that, it's been a really fun time for this Kansas State Wildcats team over the past couple games. I mean, how fun has it been to watch this team step up since the game against West Virginia? A 3-game winning streak, and it feels so much better because you win that game at home against West Virginia, ranked 23rd in the country. Then you take care of Oklahoma State in fashion when you thought that this team, when Oklahoma State was looking for a sweep, a season sweep, they felt good about it. And they came out almost losing by 30. And then you go on the road in one of the toughest road environments to take on the Iowa State Cyclones, the 3rd-ranked team in the country, and you beat them by 19. For the record, the new AP poll came out, and they moved Iowa State all the way down to 8 for that loss against us, the Kansas State Wildcats. Now, this weekend, against the Kansas Jayhawks on Saturday, 16th-ranked Kansas. But first, you got to take care of business on the road against Arizona State. Is Arizona State, could this be a trap game for the Wildcats? Are they looking ahead to the Jayhawks? Are they looking ahead to just a few Saturdays ago, being down 14-0 in the first 4 minutes of the game? Other than that first 4 minutes, they won the basketball game. They outscored Kansas from minute 5 to the rest of the game. If it wasn't for those first 4 minutes, that's in the head of this basketball team. But hopefully they start thinking about that after Tuesday's game against Arizona State. You got all the rest of the week to worry about Kansas. You got one more night to focus on Arizona State. This game cannot be a trap game because if you want to have a possibility to make the NCAA tournament, you have to have a strong finish to the rest of the year. This is where I think you need to finish right now. You are 4-6 in the conference. You are 10-11 on the season. You are currently 9th in the Big 12. This is where I think you have 10 games left, beginning with Tuesday's game on the road against Arizona State. I think you got to go 8-2 to safely 8-2 plus at least one win in the Big 12 tournament. So 1-1 at the very worst. I think if you can do that, you are safely in March Madness. Even if it's a bubble team, even if it's the first 4 in or last 4 in my mind, that's safely in. Like, I think you got it. Where we're at right now, if you can be the last 4 in after the beginning of the season you had, that's safely in my opinion. 8-2, I think safely does it. And 1-1 in the Big 12 tournament. I think the 1-1 in the Big 12 tournament is like has to happen. Like no exceptions on that one. You have to get at least one win in the Big 12 tournament. Now, if you win it all, you're in, and you get no problem for that. And that might have to happen if we don't get the 8-2 and the rest of the conference play. I could potentially see 7-3, but if that's the case, you must win. You must win at least 2 of the 3 against Kansas, Arizona, or the season finale against Iowa State. I think you have to have 2 of those 3 wins if you're going to go 7-3. And I think there's still a chance there. I think that's a fair conversation. If you went 8-2 and even those 2 losses are to some of those ranked opponents, I think you're in really good shape, actually, because quad one losses don't look too bad. I think that's actually your best bet scenario. If you're really honest with you, if you had to lose any games, you're probably going to want to lose some of those really ranked games and take care of everybody else. If you had to lose a game, right? I think I'd rather you lose against Arizona than lose against Utah. I think that would probably be better. I don't know. Does that work? What's your thought process? Do you think, would you rather win against a ranked Arizona team later on in the year or lose on the road to a pretty bad Utah team this year? What would be better for your resume, right? It doesn't matter for seeding for Big 12 conference play because it's a win and it's a loss in conference play. But what do you think it means for the resume? Either way, I hope it's not a look-over game. You know, an Arizona State might be looking a little lazy as well. They might not be completely locked in because they had an interesting game against Arizona. There was some ejections. There was a weird way of their head coach not shaking hands with Tommy Lloyd and the Arizona team at the end of the game. There's a possibility that one of the Arizona State players will be suspended. I haven't heard anything at the moment right now, but there's a possibility that BJ Freeman, who averages almost 13 points a game, may not be able to participate in this one against Kansas State, regardless of the case of who plays or how that team is acting or behaving, or if maybe they're not fully focused on this one. Kansas State has to be locked in. Has to be locked in. They have to take care of business, and they cannot treat this one like a trap game or a look-over game. They can't be focused on Kansas, and I don't think they're going to be because of how this season started. Because the way the season started, they know that every game now is super important. They've lost the games. They've lost the teams that are worse than Arizona State this year, but they most definitely can beat this team on the road. If they play the way that they have played these last 3 games against West Virginia, against Oklahoma State, and against Iowa State, not only will this be a statement win heading back home to Manhattan against the Kansas Jayhawks, it will be a completely different conversation about how we should be looking at this Kansas State Wildcats team for the rest of the year. In order to get to 8-2 for the rest of the season, you got to win the first one, because losing that first one, especially the rest of the record, the rest of the way, if you lose this one against Arizona State and then you got to go 8-1 the rest of the way with Kansas, with Arizona, and Iowa State still on the schedule, that's a daunting task. 8-2 is already daunting. You got to take care of the Sun Devils in their own house. And I think Kansas State can do it. I'm really looking forward to seeing that one. I'm looking forward to seeing Doug McDaniel take care of business, stepping up as the point guard we've all loved and seen so far. Coleman Hawkins taking that next step forward. He's becoming a brilliant piece that coming over from the transfer portal. Definitely didn't think that way early. And I'm easily okay with eating my own words and eating my shorts on that one. I'm definitely okay with that, if that means this team can find a way to make it happen. We'll be back with another episode tomorrow. We got plenty to talk about college football. And of course, we will be back live of a post-game show of college basketball, the men's team taking on these Arizona State Sun Devils. We got women's basketball to talk about. So much this week. February is going to be cooking here on the show. But until then, please like the video, please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.